Signs of the Times by Thomas Carlyle. Published 1829. Narrated by American Male 1 version 0.2. Published by Logos Ex Machina. It is no very good symptom either of nations or individuals that they deal much in vaticination. Happy men are full of the present, for its bounty suffices them, and wise men also, for its duties engage them. Our grand business undoubtedly is, not to see what lies dimly at a distance, but to do what lies clearly at hand. Knowst thou yesterday, its aim and reason, work'st thou well today, for worthy things, only wait the more as in the season, needst not fear what haps where it brings. But man's large discourse of reason will look before and after, and, impatient of the ignorant present time, will indulge in anticipation far more than profits him. Seldom can the unhappy be persuaded that the evil of the day is sufficient for it, and the ambitious will not be content with present splendor, but paints yet more glorious triumphs on the cloud curtain of the future. The case, however, is still worse with nations, for here the prophets are not one, but many, and each incites and confirms the other, so that the fanatical fury spreads wider and wider, till at last even Saul must join in it. For there is still a real magic in the action and reaction of minds on one another. The casual deliration of a few becomes, by this mysterious reverberation, the frenzy of many. None lose the use, not only of their understandings, but of their bodily senses, while the most obdurate unbelieving hearts melt, like the rest, in the furnace where all are cast as victims and as fuel. It is grievous to think that this noble omnipotence of sympathy has been so rarely a Aaron's rod of truth and virtue, and so often the enchanter's rod of wickedness and folly. No solitary miscreant, scarcely any solitary maniac, would venture on such actions and imaginations, as large communities of sane men have, in such circumstances, entertained a sound wisdom. Witness long scenes of the French Revolution, in these late times. Levity is no protection against such visitations, nor the utmost earnestness of character. The New England Puritan burns witches, wrestles for months with the horrors of Satan's invisible world, and all ghastly phantasms, the daily and hourly precursors of the last day. Then suddenly bethinks him that he is frantic, weeps bitterly, prays contritely, and the history of that gloomy season lies behind him like a frightful dream. Old England has had her share of such frenzies and panics, though happily, like other old maladies, they have grown milder of late, and since the days of Titus Oates have mostly passed without loss of men's lives, or indeed without much other loss than that of reason, for the time, the suffers. In this mitigated form, however, the distemper is of pretty regular recurrence, and may be reckoned on at intervals, like other natural visitations, so that reasonable men deal with it, as the Londoners do with their fogs, go cautiously out into the groping crowd, and patiently carry lanterns at noon, knowing by well-grounded faith that the sun is still in existence, and will one day reappear. How often have we heard, for the last 50 years, that the country was wrecked and fast sinking, whereas, up to this date, the country is entire and afloat. The state in danger is a condition of things, which we have witnessed 100 times, and as for the church, it has seldom been out of danger since we can remember it. All men are aware that the present is a crisis of this sort, and why it has become so. The repeal of the Test Acts, and then of the Catholic disabilities, has struck many of their admirers with an indescribable astonishment. Those things seemed fixed and immovable, deep as the foundations of the world, and lo, in a moment they have vanished, and their place knows them no more. Our worthy friends mistook the slumbering Leviathan for an island, often as they had been assured that intolerance was and could be nothing but a monster, and so, mooring under the lee, they had anchored comfortably in a Scavrand, thinking to take good cheer, as for some space they did. But now their Leviathan has suddenly dived under, and they can no longer be fastened in the stream of time, but must drift forward on it, even like the rest of the world. No very appalling fate, we think, could they but understand it, which, however, they will not yet for a season. Their little island is gone, sunk deep amid confused eddies, and what is left worth caring for in the universe? What is it to them that the great continents of the earth are still standing, and the pole star and all our lead stars in the heavens, still shining and eternal? Their cherished little haven is gone, and they will not be comforted, and therefore, day after day, in all manner of periodical or perennial publications, the most lugubrious predictions are sent forth. The king has virtually abdicated, the church is a widow without, public principle is gone, private honesty is going, society, in short, is fast falling in pieces, and a time of a mixed evil has come on us. At such a period, it was to be expected that the rage of prophecy should be more than usually excited. Accordingly, the millenarians have come forth on the right hand, and the Millites on the left, The fifth monarchy men prophesy from the Bible, and the utility from Bentham. One announces that the last of the seals is to be opened positively in the year 1860, and the other assures us that the greatest happiness principle is to make a heaven of earth in a still shorter time. We know these symptoms too well to think it necessary safe to interfere with them. Time and the hours will bring relief to all parties. The grand and current of Delphic or other noises is the echo. Left to themselves, they will the sooner dissipate and die away in space. Meanwhile, we too admit that the present is an important time, as all present time necessarily is. The poorest day that passes over us is the conflicts of two eternities. It is made up of currents that issue from the remotest past and flow onwards into the remotest future. We were wise indeed, could we discern truly the signs of our own time, and by knowledge of its wants and advantages, wisely adjust our own position in it. Let us, instead of gazing idly into the obscure distance, look calmly around us for a little on the perplexed scene where we stand. Perhaps, on a more serious inspection, something of its perplexity will disappear, some of its distinctive characters and deeper tendencies more clearly reveal themselves, whereby our own relations to it, our own true aims and endeavors in it, may also become clear. Were we required to characterize this age of ours by any single epithet, we should be tempted to call it not an heroical, devotional, philosophical, or moral age, but, above all others, the mechanical age. It is the age of machinery, in every outward and inward sense of that word, the age which, with its whole undivided might, forwards, teaches and practices the great art of adapting means to ends. Nothing is now done directly, or by hand, all is by rule and calculated contrivance. For the simplest operation, some helps and accompaniments, some cunning abbreviating processes in readiness. Our old modes of exertion are all discredited and thrown aside. On every hand, the living artisan is driven from his workshop to make room for a speedier, inanimate one. The shuttle drops from the fingers of the weaver and falls into iron fingers that ply it faster. The sailor furls his sail and lays down his oar, and bids a strong, unwee servant, on vae wings, bear him through the waters. Men have crossed oceans by steam, the Birmingham Fire King has visited the fabulous East, and the genius of the Cape, were there any humans now to sing it, has again been alarmed, and with far stranger thunders than Gama's. There is no end to machinery. Even the horse is stripped of his harness, and finds a fleet fire horse invoked in his stead. Ye have an artist that hatches chickens by steam. The very brood hen is to be superseded. For all earthly, and for some unearthly purposes, we have machines and mechanic furtherance. For mincing our cabbages, for casting us into magnetic sleep, we remove mountains, and make seas our smooth highways. Nothing can resist us. We war with rude nature, and, by our resistless engines, come off always victorious, and loaded with spoils. What wonderful accessions have thus been made, and are still making, to the physical power of mankind! How much better fed, clothed, lodged, and, in all outward respects, accommodated men now are, or might be, by a given quantity of labor, is a grateful reflection which forces itself on every one. What changes, too, this addition of power is introducing into the social system. How wealth has more and more increased, and at the same time gathered itself more and more into masses, strangely altering the old relations, and increasing the distance between the rich and the poor, will be a question for political economists, and a much more complex and important one than any they have yet engaged with. But leaving these matters for the present, let us observe how the mechanical genius of our time has diffused itself into quite other provinces. Not the external and physical alone is now managed by machinery, but the internal and spiritual also. Here to nothing follows its spontaneous course, nothing is left to be accomplished by old natural methods. Everything has its cunningly devised implements, its pre-established apparatus. It is not done by hand, but by machinery. Thus we have machines for education, Lancastrian machines, Hamiltonian machines, monitors, maps and emblems. Instruction, that mysterious communing of wisdom with ignorance, is no longer an indefinable tentative process, requiring a study of individual aptitudes, and a perpetual variation of means and methods, to attain the same end, but a secure, universal, straightforward business, to be conducted in the gross, by proper mechanism, with such intellect as comes to hand. Then, we have religious machines of all imaginable varieties. The Bible Society, professing a far higher and heavenly structure, is found, on inquiry, to be altogether an earthly contrivance, supported by collection of monies, by fomenting of vanities, by puffing, intrigue and chicane, a machine for converting the heathen. It is the same in all other departments. Has any man, or any society of men, a truth to speak, a piece of spiritual work to do, they can nowise proceed at once and with the mere natural organs, but must first call a public meeting, appoint committees, issue prospectuses, eat a public dinner, in a word, construct or borrow machinery, what to speak it and do it. Without machinery, they were hopeless, helpless, a colony of Hindu weavers squatting in the heart of Lancashire. Mark 2. How every machine must have its moving power, in some of the great currents of society. Every little sect among us, Unitarians, Utilitarian, and Anabaptists, Frenolid, must have its periodical, its monthly or quarterly magazine, hanging out, like its windmill, into the populace war, to grind meal for the society. With individuals, in like manner, natural strength avails little. No individual now hopes to accomplish the poorest enterprise single-handed and without mechanical ease. He must make interest with some existing corporation, and till his field with their oxen. In these days, more emphatically than ever, to live signifies to unite with a party, or to make one. Philosophy, science, art, literature, all depend on machinery. No Newton, by silent meditation, now discovers the system of the world from the falling of an apple. But some quite other than Newton stands in his museum, his scientific institution, and behind whole batteries of retorts, and galvanic piles imperatively interrogates nature, who, however, shows no haste to answer, in defect of Raphaels and Angelos and Mozarts. We have royal academies of painting, sculpture, music, whereby the languishing spirits of art may be strengthened, as by the more generous diet of a public kitchen. Literature, too, has its paternoster row mechanism, its trade dinners, its editorial conclaves, and huge subterranean, puffing bellows. So that books are not only printed, but, in a great measure, written and sold by machinery. National culture, spiritual benefit of all sorts, is under the same management. No Queen Christina, in these times, needs to send for her Descartes. No King Frederick for his Voltaire, and painfully nourish him with pensions and flattery. Any sovereign of taste, who wishes to enlighten his people, has only to impose a new tax, and with the proceeds establish philosophic institutes. Hence the royal and imperial societies, the bibliotheques, glyptotheques, pontifics, which front us in all capital cities, like so many well-finished hives, to which it is expected the stray agencies of wisdom will swarm of their own accord, and hive and make honey. In like manner, among ourselves, when it is thought that religion is declining, we have only to vote $500,000 worth of bricks and mortar, and build new churches. In Ireland it seems they have gone still farther, having actually established a penny-a-week purgatory society. Thus does the genius of mechanism stand by to help us in all difficulties and emergencies, and with his iron back bears all our burdens. These things, which we state lightly enough here, are yet of deep import, and indicate a mighty change in our whole manner of existence. For the same habit regulates not our modes of action alone, but our modes of thought and feeling. Men are grown mechanical in head and in heart, as well as in hand. They have lost faith in individual endeavor, and in natural force of any kind, not for internal perfection, but for external combinations and arrangements, for institutions, constitutions, for mechanism of one sort or other, do they hope and struggle. Their whole efforts, attachments, opinions, turn on mechanism, and are of a mechanical character. We may trace this tendency in all the great manifestations of our time, in its intellectual aspects, the studies it most favors and its manner of conducting them, in its practical aspects, its politics, arts, religion, morals, in the whole sources, and throughout the whole currents, of its spiritual, no less than its material activity. Consider, for example, the state of science generally in Europe at this period. It is admitted, on all sides, that the metaphysical and moral sciences are falling into decay, while the physical are engrossing, every day, more respect and attention. In most of the European nations there is now no such thing as a science of mind, only more or less advancement in the general science, or the special sciences, of matter. The French were the first to desert metaphysics, and though they have lately affected to revive their school, it has yet no signs of vitality. The land of Malebranche, Pascal, Fenelon, has now only its cousins and Villamines, while the department of physics, it reckons farther names. Among ourselves, the philosophy of mind, after a rickety infancy, which never reached the vigor of manhood, fell subtly into decay, languished and finally died out, with its last amiable cultivator, Professor Stewart. In no nation but Germany has any decisive effort been made in psychological science, not to speak of any decisive result. The science of the age, in short, is physical, chemical, physiological, in all shapes mechanical. Our favorite mathematics, the highly prized exponent of all these other sciences, has also become more and more mechanical. Excellence in what is called its higher departments depends less on natural genius than on acquired expertness in wielding its machinery. Without undervaluing the wonderful results which a Lagrange or Laplace adduces by means of it, we may remark that their calculus, differential and integral, is little else than a more cunningly constructed arithmetical mill, where the factors being put in are, as it were, ground into the true product under cover, and without other effort on our part than steady turning of the handle. We have more mathematics than ever, but less mythus. Archimedes and Plato could not have read the Mécanique Céleste, but neither would the whole French Institute see out in that saying, God geometrices, but a sentimental rhodomontade. Nay, our whole metaphysics itself, from Locke's time downward, has been physical, not a spiritual philosophy, but a material one. The singular estimation in which his essay was so long held as a scientific work, an estimation grounded, indeed, on the estimable character of the man, will one day be thought a curious indication of the spirit of these times. His whole doctrine is mechanical, in its aim and origin, in its method and its results. It is not a philosophy of the mind. It is a mere discussion concerning the origin of our consciousness, or ideas, or whatever else they are called, a genetic history of what we see in the mind. The grand secrets of necessity and free will, of the mind's vital or non-vital dependence on matter, of our mysterious relations to time and space, to God, to the universe, are not, in the faintest degree, touched on in these inquiries, and seem not to have the smallest connection with them. The last class of our Scotch metaphysicians had a dim notion that much of this was wrong, but they knew not how to write it. The school of Reid had also from the first taken a mechanical course, not seeing any other. The singular conclusions at which Hume, setting out from their admitted premises, was arriving, brought this school into being. They let loose instinct, as an undiscriminating band dog, to guard them against these conclusions. They tugged lustily at the logical chain by which Hume was so coldly towing them in the world into bottomless abysses of atheism and fatalism. But the chain somehow snapped between them, and the issue has been that nobody now cares about either, any more than about Hartley's, Darwin's, or Priestley's contemporaneous doings in England. Hartley's vibrations and vibrationcles, one would think, were material and mechanical enough, but our continental neighbors have gone still farther. One of their philosophers has lately discovered that, as the liver secretes bile, so does the brain secrete thought, which astonishing discovery Dr. Comenius, more lately still, in his Rapports du physique et du moral de l'homme, has pushed into its meanest developments. The metaphysical philosophy of this last inquirer is certainly no shadow or unsubstantial one. He fairly lays open our moral structure with his dissecting knives and real metal probes, and exhibits to the inspection of mankind, by Ludwig microscopes, an inflation with the anatomical blowpie. Thought, he is inclined to hold, is still secreted by the brain, but then poetry and religion, and it is really worth knowing, are a product of the small intestines. We have the greatest admiration for this learned doctor. With what scientific stoicism he walks through the land of wonders, unwondering, like a wise man through some huge, gaudy, imposing Vauxhall, whose fireworks, cascades, and symphonies the vulgar may enjoy and believe in, but where he finds nothing real with the saltpeter, pasteboard, and catgut. His book may be regarded as the ultimatum of mechanical metaphysics in our time, a remarkable realization of what in Martin Scrubulus was still only an idea, that, as the jack had a meat-roasting quality, so had the body a thinking quality, upon the strength of which the Nurembergers were to build a wood and leather man, who should reason as well as most country parsons. Falkenson did indeed make a wood duck, that seemed to eat and digest. But that bold scheme of the Nurembergers remained for a more modern virtuoso. This condition of the two great departments of knowledge, the outward, cultivated exclusively on mechanical principles, the inward, finally abandoned, because, cultivated on such principles, it is found to yield no result, sufficiently indicates the intellectual bias of our time, its all-pervading disposition towards the line of inquiry. In fact, an inward persuasion has long been diffusing itself, and now and then even comes to utterance that, except the external, there are no true sciences. that to the inward world, if there be any, our only conceivable road is through the outward, that, in short, what cannot be investigated and understood mechanically, cannot be investigated and understood at all. We advert the more particularly to these intellectual propensities, as to prominent symptoms of our age, because opinion is at all times doubly related to action, first as cause, then as effect. And the speculative tendency of any age will therefore give us, on the whole, the best indications of its practical tendency. Nowhere, for example, is the deep, almost exclusive faith we have in mechanism more visible than in the politics of this time. Civil government does by its nature include much that is mechanical, and must be treated accordingly. We term it indeed, in ordinary language, the machine of society, and talk of it as the grand working wheel from which all private machines must derive, or to which they must adapt, their movements. Considered merely as a metaphor, all this is well enough. But here, as in so many other cases, the foam hardens itself into a shell, and the shadow we have wantonly evoked stands terrible before us and will not depart at our bidding. Government includes much also that is not mechanical, and cannot be treated mechanically, of which latter truth, as appears to us, the political speculations and exertions of our time are taking less and less cognizance. In the very outset, we might note the mighty interest taken in mere political arrangements, as itself the sign of a mechanical age. The whole discontent of Europe takes this direction. The deep, strong cry of all civil nations, a cry which, everyone now sees, must and will be answered, is, give us a reform of government, a good structure of legislation, a proper check upon the executive, a wise arrangement of the judiciary, is all that is wanting for human happiness. The philosopher of this age is not a Socrates, a Plato, a Hooker, or a Taylor, who inculcates on men the necessity and infinite worth of moral goodness, the great truth that our happiness depends on the mind which is within us, and not on the circumstances which are without us, but a Smith, a De Lolum, a Bentham, who chiefly inculcates the reverse of this, that our happiness depends entirely on external circumstances, that the strength and dignity of the mind within us is itself the creature and consequence of these, or the laws, the government, in good order, are well with us. The rest would care for itself. Dissensions from this opinion, expressed or implied, are now rarely to be met with, widely and angrily as men differ in its application. The principle is admitted by all. Equally mechanical, and of equal simplicity, are the methods proposed by both parties for completing or securing this all-sufficient perfection of arrangement. It is no longer the moral, religious, spiritual condition of the people that is our concern, but their physical, practical, economical condition, as regulated by public laws. Thus is the body politic more than ever worshipped and tendered, but the soul politic less than ever. Love of country, in any high or generous sense, in any other than an almost animal sense, or mere habit, has little importance attached to it in such reforms, or in the opposition shown them. Men are to be guided only by their self-interest. Good government is a good balancing of these, and, except a keen-eyed appetite for self-interest, requires no virtue in any quarter. To both parties it is emphatically a machine. To the discontented, a taxing machine. To the contented, a machine for securing property. Its duties and its faults are not those of a father, but of an active parish constable. Thus it is by the mere condition of the machine, by preserving it untouched, or else by reconstructing it, and awolling it anew, that man's salvation as a social being is to be ensured and indefinitely promoted. Contrive the fabric of law right, and without farther effort on your part, that divine spirit of freedom, which all hearts venerate and long for, will of herself come to inhabit it, and under her healing wings every noxious influence will wither. Every good and salutary one more and more expand. Nay, so devoted are we to this principle, and at the same time so curiously mechanical, that a new trade, specially grounded on it, has arisen among us, under the name of codification, or code-making in the abstract, where any people, for a reasonable consideration, may be accommodated with the patent code, more easily than curious individuals with patent breaches, for the people does not need to be measured first. To us who live in the midst of all this, and see continually the faith, hope, and practice of everyone founded on mechanism of one kind or other, it is apt to seem quite natural, and as if it could never have been otherwise. Nevertheless, if we recollect or reflect a little, we shall find both that it has been, and might again be otherwise. The domain of mechanism, meaning thereby political, ecclesiastical, or other outward establishments, was once considered as embracing, and we are persuaded can at any time embrace, but a limited portion of man's interests, and by no means the highest portion. To speak a little pedantically, there is a science of dynamics in man's fortunes and nature, as well as of mechanics. There is a science which treats of, and practically addresses, the primary, unmodified forces and energies of man, the mysterious springs of love and fear and wonder, of enthusiasm, poetry, religion, all which have a truly vital and infinite character, as well as a science which practically addresses the finite, modified developments of these, when they take the shape of immediate motives, as hope of reward, or as fear of punishment. Now it is certain that in former times the wise men, the enlightened lovers of their kind, who appear generally as moralists, poets or priests, did, without neglecting the mechanical province, deal chiefly with the Tao, applying themselves chiefly to regulate, increase and purify the inward primary powers of man, and fancying that herein lay the main difficulty, and the best service they could undertake. But a wide difference is manifest in our age. For the, who now appear as political philosophers, deal exclusively with the mechanical province, and occupying themselves in counting up and estimating men's motives, strive by curious checking and balancing, and other adjustments of profit and loss, to guide them to their true advantage, while, unfortunately, those same motives are so innumerable and so variable in every individual, that no really useful conclusion can ever be drawn from their enumeration. But though mechanism, wisely contrived, has done much for man in a social and moral point of view, we cannot be persuaded that it has ever been the chief source of his worth or happiness. Consider the great elements of human enjoyment, the attendant possessions that exalt man's life to its present height, and see what part of these he owes to institutions, to mechanism of any kind, and what to the instinctive, unbounded force, which nature herself lent him, and still continues to him. Shall we say, for example, that science and art are indebted principally to the founders of schools and universities? Did not science originate rather, and gain advancement, in the obscure closets of the Roger Bacons, Keplers, Newtons, in the workshops of the Faust and the Watts, wherever, and in what guise nature, from the first times downwards, had sent a gifted spirit upon the earth? Again, were Homer and Shakespeare members of any beneficed guild, or made poets by means of it? Were painting and sculpture created by forethought, brought into the world by institutions for that end? No, science and art have, from first to last, been the free gift of nature, an unsolicited, unexpected gift, often even a fatal one. These things rose up, as it were, by spontaneous growth, in the free soil and sunshine of nature. They were not planted or grafted, nor even greatly multiplied or improved by the culture or manuring of institutions. Generally speaking, they have derived only partial help from these, often enough have suffered damage. They made constitutions for themselves. They originated in the die nature of man, not in his mechanical nature. Or, to take an infinitely higher instance, that of the Christian religion, which, under every theory of it, in the believing or unbelieving mind, must ever be regarded as the crowning glory, or rather the life and soul, of our whole modern culture. How did Christianity arise and spread abroad among men? Was it by institutions and establishments and well-arranged systems of mechanism? Not so. On the contrary, in all past and existing institutions for those ends, its divine spirit has invariably been found to languish and decay. It arose in the mystic deeps of man's soul, and was spread abroad by the preaching of the word, by simple, altogether natural and individual efforts, and flew, like hallowed fire, from heart to heart, till all were purified and illuminated by it, and its heavenly light shone, as it still shines, and, as sun or star, will ever shine, through the whole dark destinies of man. Here again was no mechanism. Man's highest attainment was accomplished, dynamically, not mechanically. Nay, we will venture to say, that no high attainment, not even any far-extending movement among men, was ever accomplished otherwise. Strange as it may seem, if we read history with any degree thoughtfulness, we shall find that checks and balances of profit and loss have never been the grand agents with men, that they have never been roused into deep, thorough, all-pervading efforts by any computable prospect of profit and loss, for any visible, finite object, but always for some invisible and infinite one. The Crusades took their rise in religion. Their visible object was, commercially speaking, worth nothing. It was the boundless invisible world that was laid bare in the imaginations of those men, and in its burning light, the visible shrunk as a scroll. not mechanical, nor produced by mechanical means, was this vast movement. No dining at Freemason's tavern with the other long train of modern machinery, no cunning reconciliation of vested interest, was required here, only the passionate voice of one man, the rapt soul looking through the eyes of one man. And rugged, seal-clad Europe trembled beneath his words, and followed him whither he listed. In later ages it was still the same. The Reformation had an invisible, mystic and ideal aim. The result was indeed to be embodied in external things, but its spirit, its worth, was internal, invisible, infinite. Our English Revolution originated in religion. Men did battle, in those old days, not for purse sake, but for conscience sake. Nay, in our own days, it is no way different. The French Revolution itself had something higher in it than cheap bread and a habeas corpus act. Here too was an idea, a dynamic, not a mechanic force. It was a struggle, though a blind and at last an insane one, for the infinite, divine nature of right, of freedom, of country. Thus does man, in every age, vindicate, consciously or unconsciously, his celestial birthright. Thus does nature hold on her wondrous, unquestionable course, and all our systems and theories are but so many froth eddies or sandbanks, which from time to time she casts up and washes away, when we can drain the ocean into mill ponds, and bottle up the force of gravity, to be sold by retail, in gas jars. Then may we hope to comprehend the infinitudes of man's whole under formulas of profit and loss, and rule over this too, as over a patent engine, by checks and valves and balances. Nay, even with regard to government itself, can it be necessary to remind anyone that freedom, without which indeed all spiritual life is impossible, depends on infinitely more complex influences than either the extension or the curtailment of the democratic interest? Who is there that, taking the high priori road, shall point out what these influences are, what deep, subtle, inextricably entangled influences they have been and may be? For man is not the creature and product of mechanism, but, in a far truer sense, its creator and producer. It is the noble people that makes the noble government, rather than conversely. On the whole, institutions are much, but they are not all. The freest and highest spirits of the world have often been found under strange outward circumstances. St. Paul and his brother apostles were politically slaves. Epictetus was personally one. Again, forget the influences of chivalry and religion, and ask, what countries produced Columbus and Elias Casas? Or, descending from virtue and heroism to mere energy and spiritual talent, Cortes, Pizarro, Alba, Sims. The Spaniards of the 16th century were indisputably the noblest nation of Europe, yet they had the Inquisition and Philip too. They have the same government at this day, and are the lowest nation. The Dutch too have retained their old constitution, but no siege of Leyden, no William the Silent, not even an Egmont or De Witt any longer appears among them. With ourselves also, where much has changed, effect has no as followed cause as it should have done, to centuries ago. The common speaker addressed Queen Elizabeth on bended knees, happy that the virago's foot did not even smite him. Yet the people were then governed, not by a castlery, but by a burghley. They had their Shaftesbury and Philip Sidney, where we have our Sheridan, Knowles, and Beau Brummel. These and the like facts are so familiar, the truths which they preach so obvious, and have in all past times been so universally believed and acted on, that we should almost feel ashamed for repeating them, were it not that, on every hand, the memory of them seems to have passed away, or at best died into a faint tradition, of no value as a practical principle. To judge by the loud clamor of our constitution builders, statists, economists, directors, creators, reformers of public societies, in a word, all manner of mechanists, from the cartwright up to the code maker, and by the nearly total silence of all preachers and teachers who should give a voice to poetry, religion, and morality, we might fancy either that man's dying nature was, to all spiritual intents, extinct, or else so perfected that nothing more was to be made of it by the old means, and henceforth only in his mechanical contrivances did any hope exist for him. To define the limits of these two departments of man's activity, which work into one another, and by means of one another, so intricately and inseparably, were by its nature an impossible attempt. Their relative importance, even to the wisest mind, will vary in different times, according to the special wants and dispositions of those times. Meanwhile, it seems clear enough that only in the right coordination of the two, and the vigorous forwarding of both, does our true line of action lie. Undue cultivation of the inward or die province leads to idle, visionary, impracticable courses, and, especially in rude eras, to superstition and fanaticism, with their long train of baleful and well-known evils. Undue cultivation of the outward again, though less immediately prejudicial, and even for the time productive of many palpable benefits, must, in the long run, by destroying moral force, which is the parent of all other force, prove not less certainly, and perhaps still more hopelessly, pernicious. This, we take it, is the grand characteristic of our age. By our skill in mechanism, it has come to pass that in the management of external things we excel all other ages, while in whatever respects the pure moral nature, in true dignity of soul and character, we are perhaps inferior to most civilized ages. In fact, if we look deeper, we shall find that this faith in mechanism has now struck its roots down into man's most intimate, primary sources of conviction, and is then sending up, over his whole life and activity, innumerable stems, fruit-bearing and poison-bearing. The truth is, men have lost their belief in the invisible and believe, and hope, and work only in the visible, or, to speak it in other words, this is not a religious age. Only the material, the immediately practical, not the divine and spiritual, is important to us. The infinite, absolute character of virtue is passed into a finite, conditional one. It is no longer a worship of the beautiful and good, but a calculation of the profitable. Worship, indeed, in any sense, is not recognized among us, or is mechanically explained into fear of pain, or hope of pleasure. Our true deity is mechanism. It has subdued external nature for us, and we think it will do all other things. We are giants in physical power. In a deeper than metaphorical sense, we are titans that strive, by heaping mountain on mountain, to conquer heaven also. The strong mechanical character, so visible in the spiritual pursuits and methods of this age, may be traced much farther into the condition and prevailing disposition of our spiritual nature itself. Consider, for example, the general fashion of intellect in this era. Intellect, the power man has of knowing and believing, is now nearly synonymous with logic, or the mere power of arranging and communicating. Its implement is not meditation, but argument. Cause and effect is almost the only category under which we look at, and work with, all nature. Our first question with regard to any object is not, what is it, but how is it? We are no longer instinctively driven to apprehend, and lay to heart, what is good and lovely, but rather to inquire, as onlookers, how it is produced, whence it comes, whither it goes. Our favorite philosophers have no love and no hatred. They stand among us not to do, nor to create anything, but as a sort of logic mills, to grind out the true causes and effects of all that is done and created. To the eye of a smith, a humor a constant, all is well that works quietly. An order of Ignatius Lowell, a presbyte of John Knox, a Wycliffe or a Henry VIII, are simply so many mechanical phenomena, cause or causing. The youthfulest of our day differs much from his pleasant predecessors. An intellectual dappling of these times boasts chiefly of his irresistible perspicacity, his dwelling in the daylight of truth, and so forth, which, on examination, turns out to be a dwelling in the rush light of closet logic, and a deep unconsciousness that there is any other light to dwell in or any other objects to survey with it. Wonder, indeed, is, on all hands, dying out. It is the sign of uncultivation to wonder. Speak to any small man of a high, majestic Reformation, of a high, majestic Luther, and forthwith he sets about accounting for it, how the circumstances of the time called for such a character, and found him, we suppose, standing girt and road ready, to do its errand, how the circumstances of the time created, fashioned, flowed him quietly along into the result, how, in short, this small man, had he been there, could have performed the like himself. For it is the force of circumstances that does everything. The force of one man can do nothing. Now all this is grounded on little more than a metaphor. We figure society as a machine, and that mind is opposed to mind, as body is to body, whereby two, or at most 10, little minds must be stronger than one great mind. Notable absurdity. For the plain truth, very plain, we think is, that minds are opposed to minds in quite a different way. And one man that has a higher wisdom, a hitherto unknown spiritual truth in him, is stronger, not than 10 men that have it not, or than 10,000, but than all men that have it not, and stands among them with a quite ethereal, angelic power, as with a sword out of heaven's own army, sky-tempered, which no buckler, and no tower of brass, will finally withstand. But to us, in these times, such considerations really occur. We enjoy if we see nothing by direct vision, but only by reflection and an anatomical dismemberment. Like Sir Hudibras, for every wise ace must have a wherefore. We have our little theory on all human and divine things. Poetry, workings of genius itself, which in all times, with one or another meaning, has been called inspiration, and held to be mysterious and inscrutable, is no longer without its scientific exposition. The building of the lofty rhyme is like any other masonry or brickwork. We have theories of its rise, height, decline, and fall, which latter, it would seem, is now near, among all people, of our theories of taste, as they are called, wherein the deep, infinite, unspeakable love of wisdom and beauty, which dwells in all men, is explained, made mechanically visible, from association and the like. Why should we say anything? Hume has written us a natural history of religion, in which one natural history all the rest are included. Strangely to does the general feeling coincide with Hume's in this wonderful problem, for whether his natural history be the right one or not, that religion must have a natural history, all of us, cleric and laic, seem to be agreed. He indeed regards it as a disease, we again as health, so far there is a difference. But in our first principle we are at one. To what extent theological unbelief, we mean intellectual dissent from the Church, in its view of Holy Writ, prevails at this day, would be a highly important, were it not, under any circumstances, an almost impossible inquiry. But the unbelief, which is of a still more fundamental character, every man may see prevailing, with scarcely any but the faintest contradiction, all around him, even in the pulpit itself. Religion in most countries, more or less in every country, is no longer what it was, and should be, a thousand-voiced psalm from the heart of man to his invisible Father, the fountain of all goodness, beauty, truth, and revealed in every revelation of these, but for the most part, a wise prudential feeling grounded on mere calculation, a matter, as all others now are, of expediency and utility, whereby some smaller quantum of earthly enjoyment may be exchanged for a far larger quantum of celestial enjoyment. Thus religion to his profit, a working for wages, not reverence, but vulgar hope or fear. Many, we know, very many we hope, are still religious in a far different sense. Were it not so, our case were too desperate. But to witness that such is the temper of the times, we take any calm observant man, who agrees or disagrees in our feeling on the matter, and ask him whether our view of it is not in general well-founded. Literature, too, if we consider it, gives similar testimony. At no former era is literature, the printed communication of thought, and of such importance, as it is now. We often hear that the Church is in danger, and truly so it is in a danger it seems not to know of, for, with its tie in the most perfect safety, its functions are becoming more and more superseded. The true Church of England, at this moment, lies in the editors of its newspapers. These preach to the people daily, weekly, admonishing kings themselves, advising peace or war, with an authority which only the first reformers, and a long-past class of popes, were possessed of, inflicting moral censure, imparting moral encouragement, consolation, edification, and always diligently administering the discipline of the Church. It may be said, too, that in private disposition the new preachers somewhat resemble the mendicant friars of old times, outwardly full of holy zeal, inwardly not without stratagem, and hunger for terrestrial things. But omitting this class, and the boundless host of watery personage who pipe, as they arable, on so many scrannel straws, let us look at the higher regions of literature, where, if anywhere, the pure melodies of poesy and wisdom should be heard. Of natural talent there is no deficiency. One or two richly endowed individuals even give us a superiority in this respect. But what is the song they sing? Is it a tone of the Memnon statue, breathing music as the light first touches it? A liquid wisdom, disclosing to our sense the deep, infinite harmonies of nature and man's soul? Alas, no. It is not Madden nor vesper hymn to the spirit of beauty, but a fierce clashing of cymbals, and shouting of multitudes, as children pass through the fire to Moloch. Poetry itself has no eye for the invisible. Beauty is no longer the god it worships, but some brute image of strength, which we may call an idol, for true strength is one and the same with beauty, and its worship also is a hymn. The meek, silent like in mold, create and purify all nature, but the loud whirlwind, the sign and product of disunion, of weakness, passes on and is forgotten. How widely this veneration for the physically strongest has spread itself through literature. Anyone may judge who reads either criticism or poem. We praise a work not as true, but as strong. Our highest praise is that it has affected us, has terrified us. All this, it has been well observed, is the maximum of the barbarous, the symptom, not of vigorous refinement, but of luxurious corruption. It speaks much, too, for men's indestructible love of truth, that nothing of this kind will abide with them. that even the talent of a Byron cannot permanently seduce us into idol worship, that he too, with all his wild siren charming, already begins to be disregarded and forgotten. Again, with respect to our moral condition, here also he who runs may read that the same physical, mechanical influences are everywhere busy. For the superior morality, of which we hear so much, we would desire to be thankful. At the same time, it were but blindness to deny that this superior morality is properly rather an inferior criminality, produced not by greater love of virtue, but by greater perfection of police, and of that far subtler and stronger police, called public opinion. This last watches over us with its Argus eyes more keenly than ever, but the inward eye seems heavy with sleep. Of any belief in invisible, divine things, we find as few traces in our morality as elsewhere. It is by tangible, material considerations that we are guided, not by inward and spiritual. Self-denial, the parent of all virtue, in any true sense of that word, has perhaps seldom been rarer, so rare is it that the most, even in their abstract speculations, regard its existence as a chimera. Virtue is pleasure, is profit, no celestial, but an earthly thing. Virtuous men, philanthropists, martyrs are happy accidents. Their case lies the right way. In all senses, we worship and follow after power, which may be called a physical pursuit. No man now loves truth, as truth must be loved, with an infinite love, but only with a finite love, as it were parings. Nay, properly speaking, he does not believe and know it, but only think it, and that there is every probability. He preaches it aloud, and rushes courageously forth with it. If there is a multitude huzzahing at his back, he ever keeps looking over his shoulder, and the instant the huzzahing languishes, he to stop short. In fact, what morality we have takes the shape of ambition or honor, beyond money and money's worth. Our only rational blessedness is popularity. It were but a fool's trick to die for conscience, only for character, by duel, or in case of extremity, by suicide. Is the wise man bound to die? By arguing on the force of circumstances. We have argued away all force from ourselves, and stand leashed together, uniform in dress and movement, like the row of some boundless galley. This and that may be right and true, but we must not do it. Wonderful force of public opinion. We must act and walk in all points as it prescribes. Follow the traffic it bids us, realize the sum of money, the degree of influence it expects of us, or we shall be lightly esteemed. Certain eye of articulate wind will be blown at us, and this what mortal courage confront. Thus, while civil liberty is more and more secured to us, our moral liberty is all but lost. Practically considered, our creed is fatalism, and, free in hand and foot, we are shackled in heart and soul with far stretcher than feudal chains. Truly may we say, with the philosopher, the deep meaning of the laws of mechanism lies heavy on us, and in the closet, in the marketplace, in the temple, by the social hearth, encumbers the whole movements of our mind, and over our noblest faculties is spreading a nightmare sleep. These dark features, we are aware, belong more or less to other ages, as well as to ours. This faith in mechanism, and the all-importance of physical things, is in every age the common refuge of weakness and blind discontent, of all who believe, as many will ever do, that man's true good lies without him, not within. We are aware also, that, as applied to ourselves in all their aggravation, they form but half a picture, that in the whole picture there are bright lights as well as gloomy shadows. If we here dwell chiefly on the latter, let us not be blamed. It is in general more profitable to reckon up our defects than to boast of our tests. Neither, with all these evils more or less clearly before us, have we at any time despaired of the fortunes of society. Despair, or even despondency, in that respect, appears to us, in all cases, a groundless feeling. We have a faith in the imperishable dignity of man, in the high vocation to which, throughout this his earthly history, he has been appointed. However it may be with individual nations, whatever melancholic speculators may assert, it seems a well-ascertained fact that in all times, reckoning even from those of the Heraclides and Pelasgi, the happiness and greatness of mankind at large have been continually progressive. Doubtless this age also is advancing. Its very unrest, its ceaseless activity, its discontent contains matter of promise. Knowledge, education are opening the eyes of the humblest, are increasing the number of thinking minds without limit. This is as it should be. For not in turning back, not in resisting, but only in resolutely struggling forward, does our life consist. Nay, after all, our spiritual maladies are but of opinion. We are but fettered by chains of our own forging, and which ourselves also can rend asunder. This deep, paralyzed sub to physical objects comes not from nature, but from our own unwise mode of viewing nature. Neither can we understand that man wants, at this hour, any faculty of heart, soul, or body that ever belonged to him. He who has been born, has been a first man, has had lying before his young eyes, and as yet unhardened into scientific shapes, a world as plastic, infinite, divine, as lay before the eyes of Adam himself. If mechanism, like some glass bell, encircles and imprisons us, if the soul looks forth on a fair heavenly country which it cannot reach, in pines, and in its scanty atmosphere is ready to perish, if the bell is but of glass, one bold stroke to break the bell in pieces, and thou art delivered. Not the invisible world is wanting, for it dwells in man's soul, and this last is still here, while the solemn temples, in which the divinity was once visibly revealed among us, crumbling away. We can repair them, we can rebuild them. The wisdom, the heroic worth of our forefathers, which we have lost, we can recover. That admiration of old Noah, which now so often shows itself as a faint dilettantism, will one day become a generous emulation, and man may again be all that he has been, and more than he has been. Nor are these the mere daydreams of fancy. They are clear possibilities. Nay, in this time they are even assuming the character of hopes. Indications we do see in other countries and in our own. Signs infinitely cheering to us that mechanism is not always to be our hard taskmaster, but one day to be our pliant, all-ministering servant, that a new and brighter spiritual era is slowly evolving itself for all man. But on these things our present course forbids us to enter. Meanwhile, that great outward changes are in progress can be doubtful to no one. The time is sick and out of joint. Many things have reached their height, and it is a wise adage that tells us, the darkest hour is nearest the dawn. Wherever we can gather indication of the public thought, whether from printed books as in France or Germany, or from Carlyle rebellions and other political tumults, as in Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Greece, the voice it utters is the same. The thinking minds of all nations call for change. There is a deep-lying struggle in the whole fabric of society, a boundless grind and collision of the new with the old. The French Revolution, as is now visible enough, was not the parent of this mighty movement, but its offspring. Those two hostile influences, which always exist in human things, and on the constant intercommunion of which depends their health and safety, had lain in separate masses, accumulating through generations, and France was the scene of their fiercest explosion. But the final issue was not unfolded in that country. Nay, it is not yet anywhere unfolded. Political freedom is hitherto the object of these efforts, but they will not and cannot stop there. It is towards a higher freedom than mere freedom from oppression by his fellow mortal that man dimly aims of this higher, heavenly freedom, which is man's reasonable service. All his noble institutions, his faithful endeavors and loftiest are but the body, and more approximated emblem. On the whole, as this wondrous planet, Earth, is journeying with its fellows through infinite space, so are the wondrous destinies embarked on it journeying through infinite time under a higher guidance than ours. For the present, as our astronomy informs us, its path lies towards Hercules, the constellation of physical power, but that is not our most pressing concern. Go where it will, the deep heaven will be around it. Therein let us have hope and sure faith. To reform a world, to reform a nation, no wise man will undertake, and all but foolish men know that the only solid, though a far slower reformation, is what each begins and perfects on himself.